I think we're about ready to get started. Everybody, welcome back from your keynote session with Jeff. It's good to see so many people still strong participating in the conference. A lot of people in this room. There's more seats up front if you want to come have a seat. So we've done a lot of security sessions yesterday, and this is the final security session for today. Or rather, I should say there's a repeat of the security of the cloud later today. If you didn't get a chance to attend the first one, you should take that opportunity. Steve is a great speaker. I'm here to talk about identity and access management. We have two sessions yesterday, one that was a guided tour through IAM, which gave you a high-level view of all the technologies that we have and how you could use it as when you're growing your company from a startup all the way up to an enterprise. We also had a session that was about delegating access to your AWS environment, talking about how can I set up environments where I use my enterprise accounts to be able to access in to AWS without having to create IAM users. What I'm going to be talking about is top 10 IAM best practices is often something that comes up as a question when we talk to customers. Tell me what the best thing to do, how to use your technologies. We're going to go through them one by one. I'm going to do a fair amount of demos, as much as I can in the time that has been allotted to me. And please hold off any questions. If there's time in the end, I will take questions. Otherwise, we can meet up outside if you want to ask questions. My name is Anders Samuelsson. I manage the program and product management in the IAM team. And I'm going to be your guide through this tour of the top 10 best practices. Another thing as well, you don't have to take notes. We have a couple of these small credit card size laminated that will have all the top 10 items, so you don't have to sit and memorize them for when you get home and repeat to others what the top 10 are. They exist on these small cards. So they'll be in the back when you leave later on. So I got to do this. So what we're going to cover, how many in this room use IAM actively today? It's about half of the audience. I'm going to do a quick overview of what IAM is, just to make sure that we have most people at the same level, because that helps a little bit when we talk about the top 10 items. We're going to walk through the top 10 best practices, and those are specifically for how you go in and secure your AWS environment. So it's recommendations. You should use them to accommodate them according to what you need, but it's best practice of what you should do. And it's demos galore. I'm going to have a demo for most of the top 10 items. I'll show you how you use them and how you set things up. So let's get started. What is IAM? IAM is a feature or technology that allows you to control who can do what in your environment. So who can do what in your environment? We give you a number of primitives that you can use this to secure your environment. Primitives, I've heard others call it Lego pieces. You can call them what they want, but they allow you to build the security that you need. You got users, you got groups, you got permissions, you got roles. And we'll cover all four of these in different top 10 items. Control. What can IAM let you do? It allows you to, in a central place, manage permissions for all the people that are going to access your environment. You can manage it fairly fine-grained, down to the API level, in some cases even down to resources. And you can control if somebody can use the console or not. You control who can do what in your environment. It is truly a security feature. When you create users in the environment, it's secure by default. What does that mean? The user cannot do anything unless you specifically grant the users permissions to do something. If it is as simple as calling describe instances, that is the only permission you grant. It's the only thing the user can do. So we'll cover this a little bit later on as well. Multiple users. You can create users as many as you want within some restrictions, but users that will fit your enterprise, and assign those users individual security credentials and individual permissions. So they are all unique identities in the system. They can all do different things depending on what you've controlled, what you've said that they can do. OK. That's a 50,000-foot overview of what IAM is, hopefully getting most of the people on the place of what IAM can offer. So IAM top 10 best practices. Excuse me, let's get started. Just to give you some hooks of what we're going to be covering the different top 10, it helps you think a little bit about what we're going to head into. We're going to talk about users, groups, permissions, passwords, MFA. If you don't know what the acronym stands for, don't worry. We will get into it for that specific topic. We'll talk about roles, We'll talk about sharing access or sharing information between accounts that you own or sharing information with an account that somebody else owns, a different business. We'll talk about rotation. We'll talk about how you can use conditions. And we'll talk about the root account. Which begs the question, how many people in here are still using their root account when they're interacting with AWS resources? Some people admit, some people will not admit. That's okay, I don't blame you, but most likely most people in here will be using, because it was half of the people that was rated said they had IAM, it was only about a tenth that said they were still using root credentials. I don't know what the rest of you are using, but that's okay. Let's head in. Number one, top 10 items. And we sort of like covered this a little bit, but create individual users. If you've got more than one person in your company, and you want to have everybody, those people, to access your environment, create individual users. Give them unique credentials and control it that way. What's the benefits around this? I'm going to remember the slides are in back. Benefits, unique credentials. You can set up unique credential rotation, so everybody can go in and rotate their own access keys or password if they have a password assigned to them. Plus, you can assign unique permissions. Some individual might only need read access. Some individual might need full access. How do you get going? What are the how-to steps? How to get started? Well, number one, you got to think through, like, what users do I need to create? That has nothing to do with IAM. That's something you need to do in your environment. It's more that you need to sit down and make a list of these are the people that I need to create access for. You can use a number of tools that we provide. We provide the ability of doing this through the IAM console. We provide the ability of doing it through our command line interface, or you can write your own application through the API. You pick what works in your environment and use that tool. Throughout the rest of the presentation, I will be using the console for the demo. It's easier to demo, and it makes it easier for me to actually show off all the different bits and pieces. So let's do the first one. That should say demo, OK. So first one was create individual users. So we need to go in and create a user in this case. So I'll open up my sign into the console. And in this case, I'm going to use my account. This asks for an additional code, and I'll cover this later. And this is going to be one of those questions I'm going to ask you again of, and you can start thinking about it now if you want to answer it or not. How many people have actually set up MFA on their account? Don't answer now. I'll ask it later. But it's also one of those really good things to make sure that you've done. It protects your environment much more than you actually can think. So create a user. You go into IAM. It's fairly easy. And I'm going to go in and create a user in this case. I'm going to call him Anders. Sorry, need to get focus. And also down here, you see generate access keys. And you can do this per user. And I'm going to just create one user for the simplicity of the demo. It says download credentials. And this is important. For those that haven't just used IAM, if you're creating a user and you want to give them access keys, you actually have to download them at the time you create. Why? Because there's no way for you to go back and say, I want the secret access key for this individual. And the reason is, it's a secret. Same thing with any operating system or any system you work with that's security. You can never ask for secrets. You can never ask for a password, as an example. You can reset a password by looking at the old one and setting a new one, but you can't request getting them back. So in this case, we'll make sure that we download them. We'll close the window. And here we have use Anders. I created Anders, and Anders can, of course, do nothing. I've just created Anders, I'll give him an access keys, but he cannot do anything in the system, secure by default. Right? Anders is not going to be able to do anything in the system until I grant him permissions. Which brings us to the next piece. Whenever you're managing permissions or users in your environment, use groups. There's a couple of reasons and benefits for doing this. Number one, it's easier to assign the same permissions to multiple users. And this is not something that's specific to AWS. This is something you use in any operating or security environment. You use groups as a way of managing access, very simple. So most of you are going to sit there going like, yeah, we know that. It's simple to reassign permissions based on somebody changing their job responsibilities. You just move them from one group to another group. And you only need to change a policy in one place or update it in one place to change the permissions for a lot of users if it's the same permission, same change you want to do. Excuse me. So how to steps? Well, there's a couple of steps you got to do before you start using us. You need to start thinking through what are the permissions I want to specify in this case, and what are the things that are specific for that specific business function. You figure out what users that you have that should fit into that function. Once you have this mapped out in front of you, then you go in and you start using IAM to set this up. And as I said, I'll promise demo, so let's go back. So here we have Anders. And what we're going to do, we're going to create a group. And Anders is a very responsible person. So we will give him administrative access. I want him to be the administrator in the account. And we're not going to go through the policy right now. We'll cover that a little bit later. I pick the group. I want to add users to the group. So I go in and add Anders. All done. Now Anders has permissions. Now to make it easier for us to actually show this, excuse me, I'm going to go in and select Anders and actually give him a password and sign in with Anders and use Anders for the remainder of the demo instead of using my account. So let's do this. We'll sign out. And this is a little bit of a shortcut. I'll show it when I get into the console where I got this from. What this does, this is the sign-in experience for an IAM user. It's a different place to sign in than your own account because you don't, what you do is you need to know which account you're signing into, which I have given an alias in this case, and the user gives a username and password. So this is a specific sign-in URL for every account. And if we go and look in the IAM console real quick, I have to scroll down. Here you see it says account alias. So this is something you can set up. And you provide this to the user once. And then whenever they signed in once, it will be remembered in a cookie. So if they click sign into the console, when they get to the site again, it will automatically pick this up and allow them to sign into the same environment. So we went in, we gave Anders full permissions, we put him in a group. What's the next top one? Well, I sort of like gave permissions, but I gave Anders all the permissions. Now, you don't want to give every user all the permissions because you're sort of like not really secure in that case. Everybody can do everything. So what you want to look at is providing least privilege, basically only giving the permissions that are required for a person to do his job or do his task. Benefits, it's more granular control. If a person only needs read access, only give them read access. It provides you more security and also allows the user for not doing something that they might not want to do just by accident. And it's easier for you to relax permissions than it is to actually raise and put more permissions on the user. If you lock it down first and see there are things that don't work, you can ease it up a little bit and try out and see what works best. And that is easier to do than actually going in and starting off broad and then trying to scope it down. How-to steps. Of course, identify where permissions are needed for the specific task. Think through, does the user need a password? Does he need to use the console? Does he need access keys? Is there applications he need to run that require access keys to interact with the APIs? That is also least privilege. If the user is only going to be using the console, do not create access keys. Least privilege. Avoid assigning a ** policy. You saw when I created Anders, I gave in what's called administrator policy. It's a policy template that gives ***. *** is our way of saying full access. Minimize that as much as possible. You're going to have users that you have to give this to because there are explicitly administrators, but keep those people to a minimum. Only give people the permissions they need to do their task. And use policy templates. There are several policy templates that we provide for each service that allows you to get started. They're not fully granular, really down to the detail level, but at least they provide permissions only for that specific service. So if they only need S3 access, use a policy template for S3 to start with. So what are we going to do in this case? So we've got the case I'm going to show now, least privilege. And it's going to look fairly similar, but I'm going to create exactly the same steps you saw, but through a different path. And it's a path that makes it easier for you to get started. So on the dashboard of IAM, we have this thing that called Create a New Group of Users wizard. And I'm going to go ahead and call this Marketing. And Marketing, I actually only want to have, and I got to find it, S3 read-only access. So I like to select the policy. And if you actually look at the policy elements, it says allow, and it says get and list. Those are the only actions, S3 actions that are allowed. And I'll click continue. And here it actually asks me for users. So this is a fast way of creating users with permissions in a wizard. So it's a recommended way of doing it. So you should probably try that out instead. So we'll add Jeff in here. And Jeff is only going to use the console. He's not going to use access keys. So I deselect the generate access keys. And let's click continue. I think I click continue. There we go. So as you see, there's no download. There's no access keys to download in this case. We'll close the window. We're going to see what Jeff is. So Jeff exists. What kind of permissions does he have? Well, he's got the group permissions. And to show that this actually is least privilege, let's give Jeff a password. We'll sign out. Sign into the console. And as you see, I didn't put in the URL again. It remembered the URL from previously when I was signed in, so it's the same account. But in this case, I have to change user. And we'll hit S3. I got my secret project that doesn't have anything secret, but has a name. And I'm going to go in and try and delete something out of it. And it says, yep, I want to delete, and failed. I can't delete. I have read-only access. I'm curious. Jeff goes into EC2 because he wants to go and see what EC2 is. Clicks on the EC2 tab. And as you can see, he has no access. Least privilege. Lock it down to only what the user has access to. Only what the user needs access to, sorry. Number 4. As you saw, I gave Anders passwords and I gave Jeff password in this case. A good practice, security practice, and also top 10 practice we recommend is you actually set a strong password policy in your account, basically controlling what kind of passwords you're going to allow users to have. Benefits, well, of course, you ensure that your users are safe and you ensure that your data is safe. How do you configure this? Well, number 1, every company usually has some sort of security policy that says our passwords need to follow the following rules. A good starting point is to look at that and then use that as a map to map in what you want to set for your password policy within AWS. And I've shown here a list of things that you can go in and set. So you can set minimum password length. You can require a combination of uppercase letter, lowercase letter, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of going into those details, let's go in and reset this. So we're back on the demo. We're going to the IAM tab, and oh, of course, I'm signed in as Jeff, least privilege. I can't do anything. So we got to sign out. Sign into the console again. And now we're going to change. So how do I set my password policy? Well, for those that have been observant, there is another link up here that says password policy. And it's fairly easy to set. You go in and select the rules that you want to have enforced within your environment. And you say apply password. This doesn't mean that it automatically, users, when they sign in the next time, is going to require them to change their password. On the other hand, is whenever they try to change their password, they have to follow the rules, whatever rules that you have set. And the same thing is going to be for the administrator. So if we take an example here, we had Jeff, and we select security credentials. So we're going to replace the existing password. We're going to try and put a simple one. So I put in simple. It's basically going to say it's not going to work. It's not following the rules. So I'm going to now change it to a password that actually does follow the rules. And now it's set. Can you hold off with questions to the end? I've got a full session, so please. I'm going to use all the time I have. So that's an easy way of setting it up. So even as an administrator, I actually have to follow the rules that's been set up for setting password policies. 5, MFA. So if we take the 4 first one we just walked through, all those 4 are things that everybody in this room should be doing today. Now, half of you didn't have your hands raised, so those people, when they leave the room, they should go sit on their laptop and start using IAM and setting it up. It is the basic top 4, top 5, if you want to say in that case, you actually should be doing. This one is also one that is key. So MFA, what is MFA? Multi-Factor Authentication. And it's an additional factor required when you're authenticating to a system. The top 10, number 5 that we have on our list. Sorry, I should be doing this. I can't remember doing this. Benefit is, whenever somebody tries to sign in, they have to use their username, password, or access keys as an example if you're going through the APIs, but also provide an additional authentication code from a device that is assigned to that individual person. And you can assign MFA devices to all your users. Right? You should assign it to people that you consider being privileged users. And we're not going to tell you what privileged users mean. That is something you have to define in your environment. A privileged user could be somebody that has all permissions or permissions to very specific APIs. But it's your decision what a privileged user is, but a strong recommendation that you set it up. How do you get started? Well, number 1 is you need to think through what kind of device do I want to support. And we support 2 different devices. There's both a virtual MFA, which is what you can have on a smartphone in this case, or you could actually use a hardware MFA, and this is provided by Gemalto. And if you haven't talked to them, Gemalto is one of the partners out on the floor. Drop by there, they'll show you the actual physical devices, the size of them, and what they look like. This is what it's going to look like. I'm going to do the demo later on, but it's very easy to set up the software, what we call the virtual MFA. You use a QR code, you take a snapshot picture, you enter 2 different codes in there, and you're done. And now it's set up, and you can set it up for virtually as many devices as you want on your phone. So if you've got multiple accounts, you can do it for different things. We have our own app, the AWS Virtual MFA. You can use the Google Authenticator, that's just fine. Any application that supports TOTP, the one-time password standard, is supported. You see also the hardware device that is on the right-hand side. I know that there is another hardware device coming out from Gemalto shortly. It's actually a credit card size, so it will fit nicely into your wallet, which is easier to handle than the hardware device you had previously. It's your choice what you want to support, and it's fairly easy to set up. Let me quickly walk through that. And if you remember, we had one privileged user, at least one user that I consider being privileged, and that's Anders. And I want him to have an MFA, and now I need to get my phone ready here. And I'm going to choose a virtual MFA. And we got this up here. Excuse me. I'm going to do this. Sorry, I can't demo this, but I'm basically taking a picture. There's probably a lot of people taking pictures of this and saying, I got access to his account. I promise you, I will delete this after the session. And we have to do 2 codes, and there's about 30 seconds in between, so there's a little bit of a wait for the second code to show up. But this is all that's needed for you to set it up. It's very easy to set up, and as I said, it's very convenient for the person that is using this. Come on. To actually get it set up and then use it. So if we now sign out, if you remember when I signed in with Anders last time, it only asked me for username and password. And then probably somebody's going to yell out the code to me, but I'm going to be before that and say what the code is. Do this. And now lets me in. So now every time Anders is going to sign in, I'm going to have the code with me. So you're now protecting anything that is, specifically if you have a production environment where you're very concerned about somebody having access to terminate your production instances, that's a good classification of somebody that is a privileged user that might be worth putting an MFA on. So now we've done this. So we did the demo, passed this one. Roles. Question: how many in the room have developed applications that are running on EC2 instances and having those applications access other AWS services? Hands up. A number. How many of you have built your own system to get access keys out to the EC2 instances? Hands up. A couple. Roles for EC2 solves this problem for you. What Roles for EC2 is, it's a mechanism that we've built that will help you get access keys out to the EC2 instances that you want to have access keys on. Which means you can focus on what's important for you, the business logic of your application, not having to worry about how do I get access keys out there. Now if I have to rotate access keys, how do I get those keys out and replace the keys I already have there? We've seen cases with customers that have they burnt them into the AMI or into their application and have had problems when they're rotating their keys and things start breaking. With this, you've taken away all the muck that's needed for you to manage these aspects. It also gives you automatic key rotation. We will rotate the keys on the instance for you multiple times a day. Also very good security posture. It gives you ability of assigning least privilege to the application. If your application is only going to be writing logs to S3, only give the application write access to the S3 bucket. It doesn't need anything else. Another benefit, the AWS SDK is fully integrated. So with the AWS SDK, you don't have to worry about the key rotation. It will take care of that for you. And it will also use those keys that come to sign all the requests to all the other AWS services. So a strong recommendation of using the AWS SDK. So if you're thinking about building an application running on EC2, talking to other services, use roles. A quick demo on how this works, and this is live demo, so bear with me. First step that you have to do is you have to go and create a role. And we're going to create a role, come on, that I'm going to call reinvent. I can't even spell, reinvent. We're going to select the, say, Amazon EC2 instances. We're going to go to the second bullet here shortly, but let's stay with this. And I talked about S3 access only, so let's pick that. There we go. Role is created. All's done. Almost. Go to EC2. Launch instance. Click Continue. And we're going to do this very basic, very simple. And I can't hardly see what it is here. There's a drop-down now that says I can pick the role. So I pick the role, reinvent. Do Continue. Do Continue. We do Continue. I need to pick the right keys. You see down here it says the role is reinvent. We click Launch. And I'm done. That's how easy it is to set up and get instances launched using roles. You can do this through autoscaling. You can use CloudFormation. They also support launching roles with instances, which means you can scale as much as you want through autoscaling groups by saying this group, use this role when you're launching instances, and automatically keys will be available out on those instances. Now, if we go in and look at the instances, it should be one that actually is coming up here shortly. I'm going to pick this. I'm just going to move this out of the way. You see it says this has a role, and I'm actually interested in this. Come on. Before I do anything here, let's see if it lets me access, or if it's a little bit too soon. Okay. The instance has to load all the necessary pieces. It should be shortly. This is the risk of demoing live. People haven't realized that, but there we go. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things. First of all, I'm going to, this has nothing to do with roles, but it allows me just to run some commands so I can actually show that the access keys have showed up in the instance. The next thing I'm going to do is, oh, we had it up here. I'm going to run this. So the credentials are made available through the instance metadata service. And if you see the result in here, it says reinvent. That was the role that we had. So we take the same command. At the end, here's the data. So if you look at this now, you've got an access key, you've got a secret key. Yes, quickly write it down. I'll challenge anybody to do it. Here's a token. And here's also an expiration time. So this basically says this token will expire at this time. Now, if you use the SDK, it will keep this information, it uses this information to know when to go and request a new session. And it will do it transparently under the covers. You don't have to worry about it. If you don't use the SDK, you have to take caution on when this is going to time out to go and request new access keys. So there's a benefit of using the SDK in order to, if you're going to use roles for EC2. Back to the presentation. I walked through this, credit role, launch an instance. I'm ahead of myself, apparently. Sharing. One of the things we've heard from a lot of customers is that I've got multiple accounts, and I have to go and create IAM users in every account, and my users need to remember which user to use for which account and which credentials, and it's hard to keep track of. So if there's any time there's a chance for you to share anything between accounts, you suddenly would have to share access keys or secrets. And sharing secrets is always scary, because secrets has a tendency of getting its own feet or getting lost or whatever the deal is. What you can do is use roles. And this is new as of last week. This is a feature we launched on Monday last week. So if you haven't heard about it, don't worry. We're going to talk about it. What's the benefit of using roles when sharing? Well, number one is you don't have to share a secret. A role in itself is not a secret. A role is just something you create to enable somebody to you delegate somebody the ability to use your information. It's easy for you to break a sharing relationship. You just delete the role, or you take away the permissions on the role. We'll look at that in a little bit. And the use cases you can use roles for, I talked about cross-account access. That's one. The other one is you can actually create like a pseudo environment within your account. So you create a role and delegate access to people in your account to do other things than they have permissions to do. Or you can use it for federation. And the last two use cases I'm not going to talk about. The last one was covered by Jeff yesterday in the delegating access to your AWS environment. Okay, so I'm going to cover a little bit more about cross-account access. And imagine you have, and the steps in this case is you create a role, you specify who you trust. In this case is you specify from what account do I trust request coming in to use my information. And you also describe what the role can do. What are the permissions on the role? If the only thing I want the user to do is read from an S3 bucket, that's the only permissions I give to the role. Remember, secure by default and least privilege. And the only thing you need to share is a role. It's the name of the role. How does this work? I got this example. I've got prod and I got dev. So the prod account, I'll create a role. I said go in and specify who can go in and access this account or where the account, who can assume this role. And that is basically just creating a policy. You see the policy here, but when I walk through the example in the console, it's going to look much cleaner. You specify the permissions. This is what the role can do within the account. Now I'm done setting up the information in the role in the account that want to share the information. Now I have to go back to the account where the user is that's going to use the information or access the information. What do I do here? Well, on user Jeff, I'm user Jeff. I go set a policy that says user Jeff can assume a role in the prod account. And the role's name is ddb-role. What's the flow? Jeff uses his long-term access keys, or rather the application Jeff has, uses Jeff's long-term access keys to call and assume the role. And what he gets back are the access keys for the role, or temporary access keys. Uses the temporary access keys to go in and talk to DynamoDB. So think of it as a way where you're exchanging access keys from one case to another one, and you're basically delegating the ability of doing this key exchange. Let's quickly just show a demo how this actually gets set up. And I'm not going to show you the actual cross-account functionality. Hold on. For some reason, this is not. Let's do this. Now my demo's not working. Let's do this. Why is this not working? I apologize for this. I have to start it up. So what you do in this case, you go into IAM, go into roles, you create a new role. Let's call it cross account. And in that role, I said I was going to walk you through this, the bottom half. Now here's the example of I'm going to provide access between accounts that I own. In this case, I need to provide an account ID, and this is the account ID from where the requests are going to come. Now, an account, the root account, cannot be used to assume a role. I'm going to do read-only access in this case. So what I've done now, I've done the first part. You remember we had on the screen that says, I'm now going to define who can go in and assume this role, and what can this role do. The second part of what I need to do is actually go and give a user the ability to do this. And I'm going to do this in the same account for the simplicity of the demo. I'm going to use Jeff as an example. Actually, I'm going to do the right thing in this case. So bear with me. I'm going to create a group that says prod access. Remember, best practice, use groups. But I'm going to do a custom policy because there is no template for this. And magically, this policy snippet appeared in my notepad. I don't know why. Let's call it demo. No, it's not doing the right thing. Live demos, people. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to wait and potentially show that in the end. So apologize for that. Rotation. So we walked through all these bits and pieces. We talked about access keys. We talked about passwords. Another key aspect of doing best practices is looking at rotating your credentials on a regular basis. You do this today within your enterprise anyway. There's usually something that forces you to change password every 90 days, and everybody grumbles and have to change the password to something they can't remember, put it on a sticky note, and put it on your monitor. But it is a good security practice to actually do the change. And it's the same thing within AWS. Now, there's some tricks to it. And that is you actually, once again, it's least privilege, right? And the user can't, and it's also secure by default. So the user cannot do anything unless you grant them permissions to do the specific tasks. So if you want them to be able to rotate their credentials, you actually have to enable them to do that. User can change password in the console. I'll show that in a little bit, how you set that up. And we talked about it before, roles for EC2. You actually get the automatic roles, automatic credential rotation using roles. And we do it multiple times on the instance, and you need to keep track of when they're getting rotated. Now let's look a little bit about policies. Now this is a policy that you would have to assign to a user to allow the user to change his password. And if you look at it, it says the account ID is not real, so you can't do anything with it. But it says Anders. It specifically says my name. So if I take this policy and assign it to the user Anders, Anders can change his password. However, if I take the same policy and assign it to Jeff, Jeff can change Anders' password. So it is a policy that explicitly has to sit on the user. So what we've done is, and this is another incentive for using the strong password policies, when you enforce the password policy, we automatically enable all the users in your environment to change their password, if you select to do so. There was a little checkbox that you can uncheck if you don't want them to do this, but that is a simpler way of doing it, which means you don't have to manage policies. Access keys is slightly more complicated because you have to go in and give all these pieces because you need to be able to create, delete, list, get all the information about access keys. So there's more permissions to set. Plus, you've got to be a little bit more careful. There are a number of steps you should go to. Number one, make sure you create a new set of access keys before you delete the old ones. Why? Well, you don't want to delete the old ones because you're still using them. And you can have 2 access keys enabled on the same identity at any given time and active. Once you've done that, you go in and change your applications or your environment that are using their old access keys to use the new access keys. And go in and do not delete the first set of access keys, but put them in inactive. When you've done that, try it out for a period of time. And this is something you need to understand is, do I try it over an hour, a week, a month? Just to make sure that everything that's running in your environment using the old access keys has moved over to the new access keys. If something breaks, you can always enable the old access keys, go in and change the code, and then make them inactive again. When you see everything running smoothly, you kill off the old access keys, and you're done. You now rotated your keys. Good practice to think about doing it through that ability. And I'm going to show a quick demo on this. And what I'm going to show in this case is more like, where does an IAM user going to change their password? Because that's something that usually comes up as a question. And you click on the security credentials page, and he actually gets a page up. It's not a page, it's a hidden page. But this is where the user changes their password. And the user will see the rules that you've defined that you want to enforce. So if I now take Anders in this case, I type in my own password, and I do password. The password, the universal secret password, it's not going to work. So we set this up. So I changed this. This is also what I want to show. If you look at the bottom here, is the list of the items we had. Allow users to change their own password. This is the way you set it up, so it actually enables all users in your environment to change their password. If you only want to give it to very specific users, you have to use the policy that I displayed on one of the slides in the deck. But if you want to enable it for all users, this is where you go in and set it up. And I'll show you real quick here as well while we're at it. We talked about access keys. And I'll select Anders, who has access keys. As you can see, I've got only one. I can go to create a second pair. Of course, I want to download this. Close the window. Now you can see I've got 2 access keys. Now I can go through the whole process I just talked about, make sure that you use the new ones, make the old ones inactive, test it out, see that the whole environment works, and once I'm done, I can delete the first ones. But I'm not going to do that for this demo right now. Conditions. Conditions is another way of providing even more granular control to your resources in your AWS environment. So you can be very restrictive. I said we talked about APIs, we talked about resources, we talked about the console, et cetera. It allows you to be very specific down to the level of time of day, or if they're coming over SSL, or if they're using a specific application when they're accessing. And it can be enabled for any API. Steps, use it where predictable, but the thing that I wanted to get to is there's 2 types of conditions. There are 6 AWS-wide conditions, like time of day, if you're using a secure transport SSL, which source IP, which IP address the request is coming from, if they're using which application they're using. Also, if they have been authenticated using MFA, and this is, once again, useful for very privileged API access. And I'll show you some examples how you set up a policy. I hope this is readable all at the back at the end. If not, I apologize if the text is too small. This shows a policy snippet or permission snippet that says this user is going to be enabled to terminate EC2 instances only if the user has validated or authenticated using an MFA. And usually that is a privileged command or privileged action you want to go in and protect. And these are 2 other examples of how you can set it up. One is talking about SSL. One is talking about source IP. You could, of course, go in and combine these conditions in any form you want. So you could create a policy that says a user is only allowed to terminate EC2 instances if he's authenticated with MFA, coming over secure transport SSL, and is coming from a specific source IP. Now, it's hard for the user in this case, but you're being very specific and very fine-grained of what the control is. Excuse me. Last one. It's not really IAM, but this one is a big one. remove or reduce any use of the root account. And this is, we call the AWS account credentials. When you created the account with AWS, we call it root. Don't use it. There is no reason for you to use the root account. The root account has all the permissions within your AWS environment. Anybody that uses it can do anything in your account, and there's no way of locking it down and setting permissions on the account. So think about it. If somebody has access to your prod environment and they're using your root credentials, they can shut down your instances. Use IAM users. There's a whole reason why I went through the top 10 list of what you should be doing. Your top 10 in this case, you should not be using your root account credentials. If you are using your root account credentials and there are things that you believe an IAM user cannot do, you come talk to me. I want to know. There should not be anything blocking you from essentially stop using your root credentials at any time. How-to steps. Number one, get rid of your access keys. Now, you've got to be slightly careful here because if you're using the root account today, it's probably embedded in some application somewhere to access AWS. So you've got to find those out, create an IAM user, take those access keys, and use those access keys with the application instead. Do not use the access keys for the root account. Number two, always set up and enable multi-factor authentication on the account. Why? Well, once again, you need another authentication factor for somebody signing into a very, very privileged account that can do anything in your environment. Right? And the other one is ensure that you set a strong password so that people can go, so that you actually protect it further. The top 10 list. If you follow these steps, you're going to be very well off. If there's one thing I want you guys to take back with you when you leave here, guess which one? Do not use your root credentials. Repeat after me. Do not use your root credentials. Here are the other sessions that were available during the week. They're going to be available up on YouTube. I don't know how long it is, but you can go and look at those sessions. They will really help you get further started. If you want more information about IAM, we have a detail page. There's also a forum specifically for identity and access management that you can go to and hang out. All this will be in the presentations that you get access to later. You can follow us on Twitter. We've got our account up there. That's all I had for today. Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference. And don't forget to fill out your evals. Don't forget to fill